Hello, I'm Kevin Walsh, and I'm here with my colleague, Ali Atami, and welcome back to the Investment Advice Hub. You may have recently seen a segment we did on, what's a prohibited transaction? And you may be wondering, my colleague, Ali mentioned that, if you have a prohibited transaction, you need a prohibited transaction exemption. So, Ali, as a follow-up, what's a prohibited transaction exemption?
Sure. So in order to receive essentially permission to engage in what would otherwise be a prohibited transaction, you need to follow an exemption. And we have a couple of flavors of exemptions. We have statutory exemptions, which are written directly into the ERISA statute. And then we have administrative exemptions, which are typically class exemptions that the Department of Labor will put out, and they'll be available for any person or entity that meets the conditions of that exemption. There's another type of exemptions called individual exemptions that probably not as applicable here.
And so in short, they allow you to do things that you wouldn't be allowed to do, otherwise.
Exactly. So a prohibited transaction exemption will lay out what transaction it's supposed to cover. So is it covering hiring somebody? Is it covering paying somebody? Is it covering the use of assets, the sale of securities? The list goes on what it could cover. And then it'll provide a list of parties that can use it. Can it be used by an insurance company? Can it be used by a broker? Can it be used by somebody with proprietary funds? And finally, it'll list all of the conditions. So those can vary, and some of them include the best interest standard, and others are more focused on fee offsetting and things like that.
Thanks. And so, going back to rollovers and, the purchase of an annuity, or opening up a brokerage account and trading, or opening up an investment. If you're a fiduciary and you do that, what are some exemptions that are commonly used, and what do they provide relief for?
Sure. So the exemption that's really top of mind there is PTE 2020-02. It's the first exemption that explicitly discusses rollover transactions as potentially being, a prohibited transaction due to fiduciary advice. So that exemption specifically covers it, and has a variety of conditions that apply to the advice fiduciary. Some of the older class exemptions, 8424, 773, 774, are also exemptions that people look to when trying to provide coverage. But the situations, when and if they can be used, tend to be much more limited and focused on exactly where the rollover is going. Is it going into a mutual fund? Is it going into an annuity? Whereas the more recent exemption is a little bit more agnostic as to where the funds end up.
Well, thank you, Ali. I think that's a great overview of prohibited transaction exemptions, and it sounds like we're going to have to delve deeper into what some of these exemptions do specifically at a later date. But thank you again.